Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome to the We All Juggle Knives channel. This video is going to be the latest in my discussion vlog of knives series. All right, I got 3 knives to tell you about today. These are all relatively inexpensive, and yet I feel they are very effective designs for what they are designed to do. Yeah, what is that? These are all designed as weapons. Now, please remember, disclaimer, if I discuss weapons, I do that either in an academic or educational sense, such as talking about historical martial arts, cultural martial arts, or in the context of legitimate and legal self-defense. All right, this was about $26. This was $16. Relatively inexpensive. Now, sometimes you'll get people that say they would never rely on a cheap knife because they feel like if they spend more, then automatically the knife will be better. Well, that is often true, but it's not always true, especially when you're dealing with knives whose primary use would be as a weapon. Now, there are certainly some expensive options in this category. For example, that karambit there is a Richard Deraspina design manufactured in Italy. All right, and this knife is a Microtech Curihee crosshair. And Microtech, great stuff, but very expensive. Speaking of Richard Deraspina, here is a semi-custom. This is a Chris dagger that was handmade by Richard Deraspina. Beautiful blade. This knife is a Calico Forge combat knife, and this is also a semi-custom. So yeah, there is some expensive stuff out there, and I'm certainly not knocking it, but at the same time, some of this stuff just doesn't make any sense for your average person. I mean, let's say you live in the bad part of town for now, and maybe things are getting a little crazy. You need something quick and dirty for self-protection. It just doesn't make sense to have some custom blade, no matter how awesome it is. I mean, if it costs more than your apartment's rent for that month, that just doesn't make any sense. So there's definitely a place for inexpensive blades, provided that they have features that can be effective for our purposes. I mean, heck, inexpensive blades, I think it's completely legitimate to talk about blades that don't even have any price at all. In other words, like improvised weapons. I mean, let's be real. More people are getting killed by prison shanks than are ever getting killed by some fancy custom knife, no matter how well made and how great the steel it may have. This knife, which is branded Wartech, I mean, Wartech. Yeah, this knife, whether intentionally or accidentally, has a lot of useful features. The contour of the handle, it's a pronounced guard, locks you in, can keep you from going up onto the edge, right? So one would be secure grip, right? Not only does it have that guard, but it also has more texture here just for that added friction. You see, this has a ring, right? Just like a traditional karambit has a ring, and if it's offset a little because of, basically you want it offset like that because it's just the way that a person's hand is. So that even gives you a little bit more of an anchor. Now, sometimes people get worried because they think, oh, this could also hurt you, theoretically. Right? Theoretically, if you were to lose your grip and then a strong force was applied, you could dislocate your finger. However, you should never let that happen. Right? You should never rely on only the ring. The ring is just a little bonus, a little enhancement, a little anchor, so to speak. But that's never meant to say that you shouldn't like firmly grip your knife, all right? So yeah, it's not a danger to you if you're using it right. Another advantage of this ring is that in addition to, you know, giving you a better grip and a better anchor, you can also bring this down on a target. Right, you see right here, you know, you got your metacarpals right there. And if you were to bring this down with a lot of force, like a hammer fist, right onto those metacarpals, I mean, that, you could break that, right? So secondary use is an impact device. However, I do think they should have put a little point there. It would have been better if it had kind of like a glass breaker point, but even just being rounded, I mean, it's hard steel. So yeah, as an impact device. Another thing about this is you got the holes here, so you could thread paracord around this, right, through those. You could bulk this up with paracord, and that would give you an even better grip because it's thin here, but if you bulked it up, it would just be more palm filling, so you could customize it and get a better grip. All right, and that brings me to my next point. One of the dangers of cheap knives is that a lot of them have like a welded screw tang, okay, which is a tang that's going to break. But this does not, and neither does this. These are true full tangs, and that's one of my, pretty much for fixed blades, that's one of my must-haves, right? It has to be a true full tang. This, you see exactly what it is. Another interesting feature is the texture here, which is basically a little thumb rest. Now, one thing about knife usage, you're never supposed to fight with your thumb right here, because if someone is quick with a snap cut, boom, they can chop your thumb right off. So you're never supposed to hold your knife out like, hey, come sever my thumb. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. No, you fight with your thumb out of the way, but at the last moment, like with a finishing cut, right, when you've already penetrated the defenses, they're on their heels, you're going in, you know, the finishing cut, right, it is acceptable to, at that point, at the last second, put your thumb here for some extra leverage. Because that finishing, that contour cut, it's stronger like this than if you just did it like this. And you can see that, right? And again, I can't use like a real model, so use your imagination. When you're cutting in like that, it's going in. That does provide extra leverage. So that has a little spot to facilitate that. Now, the shape of it. It's very pointed. And as you can see, it actually is not inline. It actually points up that way, right? However, if you put this straight through, it's pointed enough, even though it's pointing that way, it would still go straight through a soft, fleshy target. So basically, that curve is not a problem. However, this curve does have some benefits. Like, number one, because it does tend to go up like that, it kind of lends itself to an upward curving thrust like this. In other words, that would be going under a rib, right, to softer areas. Right, so it lends itself to that kind of thrust. Now, this particular blade shape, which you often see in hunting and skinning knives, right, you've got a trailing tip, a pronounced belly. You also see that curve. You'll see that again and again in butcher knives. This blade shape actually makes the knife less good for a slash, but it makes it better for a slice. So what the heck is the difference between a slash versus a slice? Well, in my terminology, a slash is basically you're reaching out. It's a very long-range technique, kind of like a jab, and you're slashing, right, at range. A slice is much more close up. A slice is a type of close cutting that you would see a butcher do to ribs or some other hunk of meat, right? If you saw a butcher at the butcher shop, does he put the meat far away and then slash at it? No. He has that meat, he grabs it in one hand and he does close cutting. Okay? So the reason that this is better for close cutting and slicing than it is for a slash is simply because the edge and the tip are, in a certain sense, falling away from the surface of the target. So to keep those in contact with the target, it would have to be moving like that, right? So for a long-range slash, not so good. not so good. If you want to slash at long range, something like this would be perfect, right? Because that acute tip, that forward tip, bites in and keeps on cutting. So for a long range slash, this would be much more effective. However, for close cutting, for what is essentially butchery, this type of blade would be very effective for the same reason that a curved butcher knife, when that butcher grabs that piece of meat and it's up close and he cuts through, for the same reason that works, this shape is very good for close cutting and slicing and basically drawing that through a target. But where the slash comes in, where the long range slash really comes in, is in the fact that when people are defending themselves, they're not necessarily trying to kill someone, but maybe just trying to keep them away, to keep them at a longer distance. Right, so that's why both slicing and slashing, I guess, have their place in the discussion. But close cutting, including slicing, gutting, things like that, severing, basically, those are more deadly than a slash. Now this is an Emerson Persian, much more expensive knife, but as you can see, look at the bellies on those, look at the trailing tips. For the same reason that is definitely a useful feature on the pricey knife, it's still a useful feature when it appears on the less expensive knife. But another thing about this is unsharpened, but you can sharpen it. The fact that you can sharpen this is great because it opens up a wealth of different cutting techniques. When you pull, right, when you pull back like this, you can apply a lot of force, right? Now usually, if you were doing a cut like that, this would be tipped down. And you'd be doing a strong, like, pulling cut with that. Right? If you imagine, let's say this flashlight was like, you know, your attacker's arm or some other part of your attacker, right? If you hook like this and then do a very strong pull, right, with that tip, I mean, you're severing, right? You're severing targets. I can't be too graphic, okay, because this is YouTube, so, but the fact that you can sharpen that part, it opens up a world of possibilities for other types of cut or technique. When this part is sharpened, now you're holding the knife, anything behind it in this zone is now subject to being cut or severed, right? Anything behind it now is in danger. If this is oriented towards a thrust, anything above it is also now in danger of being cut. So for example, if someone were to try to grab your hand, well, look where this is. He's going in here. You can kiss those fingers goodbye, you know? So if someone is trying to mess with you, trying to grab you from any direction, anything that ventures in here is going to get severed by a very strong pulling cut, right? So it makes it very hard for someone to grab at you or to disarm you. I mean, it threatens their wrist, their forearm, their fingers, whatever wanders into this death zone here can be cut with a strong pulling cut. Right? It makes it very difficult to disarm you or to grab you. So despite being only $16, this thing actually has a lot of useful features. Now, I don't know if they did that on purpose or if they just tried to design something that looks cool and kind of accidentally had like a perfect storm of features. Most likely they copied some of these features from like knives where the designer did know what he was doing. You know what I'm saying? But for whatever reason, this has a whole bunch of features that I find desirable. Now, it did not come sharp at all, but you can fix that yourself. And, you know, you can sharpen this and, you know, sharpen the main edge. Now, the steel is a cheap steel. The steel was listed as 3CR13, very cheap stainless steel. And now, I'm just as much of a steel snob as everybody else, but not for this category of knives, right? If you're talking about like EDC collectible, high-end, everyday carry folders that are not meant for any type of combat, then sure, I love super steels that have great edge retention. All right, but for stuff like this, which is essentially hopped up shanks, a super steel is not necessary. In fact, steel itself is not technically necessary. I've seen prison weapons made of aluminum cafeteria table fixtures, old style. They took an aluminum fixture and they turned it into basically the shape of a gladius. I've also seen, in documentaries and so forth, they break off a piece of a plastic tray, hard plastic, and they bring it to a point by grinding it against some concrete. And it's just plastic, not even steel. But those shanks are deadly, right? So for a hopped up shank, not only do you not need a super steel, you don't necessarily even need a steel. Plastic, wood, aluminum. I've seen deadly weapons made of all of those things, right? So for that reason, yeah, I would normally turn my nose up at 3CR13, but for this purpose, it'll do. Now, many of the benefits that apply to this as well, because it's like the same idea. This is a Cancun knife. Oh, I will include links to this stuff in the text box, of course. This is a Canku branded knife. And it's interesting, they put like a thumb stop here, which it's not really necessary. I mean, that's something, you usually see that on karambits, but basically, I might as well show you what it is, right? It's there, but it's for when people want to like do tricks. It's a place for your thumb. It's a thumb stop. Now, I really wouldn't use that for anything practical, but yeah, you see, it's just to stop the motion. If you wanted to spin this, I don't know why you would. You probably wouldn't unless you're just like fucking around, okay? But since it is a feature, I'll just show you. It's like that. A lot of karambits have that, and people do tricks and so forth. So you can see, it's a true full tang. It's very pointed. I mean, this thing would not require a lot of strength to pierce, right? And it's also just long enough that it can reach vitals, at least, depending on the target. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty brutal. That's pretty brutal. Who but a crazy person would actually want to go up against this? You know what I mean? Even if you have a lot of training, I mean, this thing would be a good deterrent, but the problem with deterrence these days, there's so many people whacked out on meth, at least in America. Meth is pretty popular, stuff like that. There's also just people that are off their rocker, so you really can't rely on brandishing. You can't rely on scaring someone. But it doesn't hurt that at least the sane people will reconsider their life and walk the other way, right, if they see this. But because there's crazy people, you still have to know how to use your items. Now, the steel on this one was listed as D2. Oh, look, definitely a step up there. And, in comparing these two, many similar benefits. However, this is even more narrow. This is really even more specialized as a piercer, a sticker, a poker, so to speak. Definitely a hopped up shank. It has a sub tip here, but it's so far down. Really, just the reason that's there is so that this segment could go so abruptly to form the tip, basically just to make it super pointed. I have to say, yeah, this is a blade that knows what it wants to do, has a little bit of secondary slashing ability, a little bit of tip cutting, but primarily a piercer, and I gotta say, pretty brutal, but would be effective for that purpose. And here's the third blade. This was less than $20. It's got a true full tang, and It's a small karambit, but don't be fooled. A small karambit really is very deadly for its size. Now, as blades get shorter, it makes more sense to have a hooking blade that's good for strong severing cuts and drawing cuts and stuff like that. Because if this was straight, it would be too short to reach vitals, right? So for a short blade, it makes so much sense, right, to have that karambit shape, right? Has a typical karambit ring. One of the reasons karambits are just very deadly is because it's very hard to see that someone actually has something. Like if you're in a dark alley or something at night, I mean, this is just a little bit of blackness that's protruding from the bottom of the hand. It's very difficult to see that someone actually has a little blade like this, right? It's got a thumb ramp here for if you wanted to do more precise work there, but usually you're going to use your karambits tip down. This is interesting. It's got a lanyard hole here, and this protrusion, it makes it just that much better as an impact device or as a compliance device as well. This is also useful for tricks. Now, I'm not suggesting you do tricks, but since this can be used for it, let me show you what it can do. It's a motion stop, right? It allows you to stop the motion of the karambit by putting your finger right there. Now, I'm not suggesting you do that in a real situation, but you know, if you're just screwing around, that's what that can be used for. As far as the ring, it is a smaller karambit, so the ring is smaller. Now, I can get it on my finger, but if you have like particularly wide fingers, you might be limited in how far you can get your finger through the ring. In an emergency, if you were forced to use a smaller blade or you just have really large hands, in an emergency you don't have to use the ring. Like if you just have really big hands and you had to use this, you would just go like this. You would just use it like this. You do what you got to do in the situation. Now, as far as how far to put your finger through a karambit ring, that really depends. The smaller the ring, right, the less far up you want it on your hand, because if it's too small, it's constricting. It's almost like finger handcuffs. So you have to be careful not to put it too far up if it is a small ring or if you just have large fingers, right? Now, if you're doing tricks, it goes farther down on your finger. Like if you're doing a lot of tricks like this, it's usually easier. It's going to be on that segment. And again, I'm not saying go do a lot of flashy tricks or anything in a conflict, but I'm just saying that that's where it's going to end up if you were doing that. It's usually often going to end up there. In order to do extensions with it up here, that would be much easier if this ring were larger. For example, this is a much larger ring and it is also rounded, so I could have this farther up and still be able to do extensions, and as you see, it's here, whereas with the smaller karambit, it is here. But if I had this on this segment with this larger ring, let me show you, it would be very unstable because the ring is so large. If it's on this segment here, it's flopping all around. But notice, when I use the smaller ring and it's on that exact same segment, it's not flopping around. It's tight, partly because of that, and partly just because it's not rounded and it's smaller. So basically, the ring, like how far or up it goes down on your finger, that's going to depend a lot on the size of the karambit ring itself. But in conclusion about this blade, it's solidly constructed, and like most karambits, it's definitely way more deadly than its small size would make you think. And it's very concealable and convenient. So yeah, I mean, overall it's good. You got to, you know, it really depends on your hand size as well as far as how viable this karambit would be for you. Oh, another thing about like how far the karambit is down or up your finger, the higher up on your finger the karambit is, the more the tip is presented. It would be easier to show you on this larger one. But basically, if this is high up on my finger, right, the tip is there. Right, you see that the tip is there. But now, if I were to move it lower on my finger, all of a sudden, if it's on this segment, look how far back the tip just went. The tip is here when it's on that segment, and when it's on this segment, now the tip is here. Right, so basically having it higher up on your finger makes the tip more forward. So that has application if you're just doing straight, like kind of thrust like that. You'd want the ring to be higher. On the other hand, like I said, if you're doing tricks and stuff, that ring will often slip down to that segment right there, just because it allows you more control. So yeah, how far up or down, it depends on what the heck you're doing and how big the ring on your karambit is. But yeah, altogether, like most small karambits, pretty deadly. Would I want this if like someone twice my size and strength was running at me for a grapple? You know, would I want this available? Heck yeah, because you can definitely, it's hard to disarm someone with a karambit, and this can definitely cut and sever strongly. So it definitely punches above its weight, and in this case, way above its low price tag as well. Alright, as promised, the sheath. So this just comes with this pretty basic sheath. It does hold it in, but it's not excessively tight, and it does have a place to push off of, so it's actually easy to unsheath. Alright, and coming up later in the video, I will recap some of the other tactical knives that I've shown in previous videos, but you see this here, if you were to have this on your belt and try to unsheath it, if it was clipped on your belt, it would pull it off of your belt. However, as you can see, I mean, there's two slots right on the clip, so you could thread a belt through that, right? And there's slots and eyelets here. You could also basically rig up something where if you wanted to carry it horizontally, you could rig up something with paracord or whatnot to make that fit on your belt like that. Also, the eyelets allow you, theoretically, it could be used as a large neck knife, but it's pretty big for that. What about this other one? Well, this actually has pretty interesting sheath. It does hold it in. All right, goes on your belt. Push that, can open, and it's locked again. All right, so that's the sheath for this one. It's got some eyelets. The karambit sheath, it just comes with a little, I think they envisioned this as a neck knife, worn around the neck, so it just comes with that. No, nothing for your belt, but because it has eyelets, you could always use paracord or something else to basically rig it so that it did have a belt loop if you so chose. All right, so that's a sheath. It does hold it in, and it's easy to push off and free it. All right, so here we have some other blades that are, again, the same idea. Now, these other four blades, I've already discussed those. I've already covered those in previous videos, but in case you haven't seen those videos, I just figured since they're all in the same category, I would remind you that they do exist. Right, this is another design by Canku, but it's very similar to a Bastinelli design. Not identical. They've changed their proportions a little, but just is the same idea. This is Smith & Wesson. It's a Smith & Wesson blade, and again, I'll include links to all these, of course, but you know, this is Smith & Wesson's take on again, that same idea that you're going to see again and again. This is just a kunai it's a fairly large kunai, and I just put a gutted paracord handle wrap on it, but this is, I mean, talk about basically just a shank. Like, that's what it is, basically just a shank. You know, or you could use it as a thrower if you really wanted to. But it was not very expensive at all. And in this same category, this is the M-Tech. They don't call it that, but I just call it the M-Tech shank, because that's what it is. doesn't even have much of an edge because it's not even meant to cut anything. In my mind, it's just, but it has a stronger type of piercing tip. I mean, talk about just a boot shank. That's what this is. Imagine you got killed by an M-Tech, and then you get to hell and you're like the most embarrassed person in hell because it's like, how did you die? Oh, I got killed by an M-Tech from the Bud K catalog. No. Yeah, no, I am joking. I mean, M-Tech usually has novelty stuff, but again, this is an example. It's full tang. They just accidentally made something that does have a use. You know, it's not a very nice use, but it's the closest thing you'll find to really literally just a deluxe boot shank. But yeah, this Canku, you know, this and this and this, and I've seen some other very nasty Canku designs. That brand, imagine you went to somewhere in China and, you know, you're on a train. Hey, what's this town I'm stopping in? Oh, this is Canku. I don't know if that's a town or what, but if it is, I'm never going to there because those Canku people, they have some dangerous stuff. But yeah, this whole design with the ring to just give you a little bit extra grip and kind of a contoured handle, and this forms the guard, and this is offset, and there's other uses for this too. Oh, that reminds me. Yeah, this very obscure knife still exists. It's hard. It has a mirror polish, so it's hard to show. But yeah, this still exists. Sold on Amazon, less than 30. Yeah, talk about that. Reminded me of this because this is curved even more, right? It's curved even more than that. But one of the uses of that curve, if you're in a grapple, if you're in a clinch, if you're rolling around, like whether standing grappling or groundwork on the floor, like the curve of this, basically it goes right around the back into the kidney. It lends itself right around into the kidney or the spine, like that curve, right? Because you can always work your hand around the back, right? And you see boxers sometimes will do like little rabbit punches, or in MMA they'll work their hands around the back. It's a clinch. They'll do little rabbit punches. There's definitely a use to a curve like that in a weapon blade. All right, so if you've made it this far into the video, you probably are either really enjoying it or you really hate me by now. But actually, I think people who hate knives and who hate weapons or are afraid of weapons, I think they probably clicked off after the first 30 seconds, you know? Maybe they left some comment like, oh, you're a psycho, you must be bad. Okay, you're free to think that, dude. I'm not here to debate an absurd topic like whether the voice near a table on the internet is like, you know, is a bad person. Now, as far as the increasing numbers of people out there that seem to get scared of objects and are triggered, maybe they're even hostile if you dare even discuss any type of blade usage, right? They are afraid. I think those people, I don't think they're really afraid of the objects. They're just afraid that things like this remind them, probably that it reminds them that they're not necessarily well trained or well equipped or well prepared if someone did try to victimize them. So they're not mad at me, they're not mad at objects on a table that can't harm them by themselves. They're really just mad at themselves. They're feeling unsafe and anxious. And how dare anyone remind them that violence ever happens, right? Well, I mean, if you want to live in a bubble like that, maybe you're right. Maybe it can't happen to you. Maybe you're extremely privileged. You live in a really wealthy area, you know, outsiders. Maybe your police department is super well funded and they kind of know who butters their bread. So if they see any outsider that doesn't fit in, they immediately, you know, segregate that person. So maybe you are just so privileged, or you have a gated community in the Hollywood Hills or something. All right, so then this video was not for you. If you're never, like, if you have some secret deal with God that he said you'll never have to fight for your life yourself, well then good for you. But for everybody else who might have to defend themselves, you know, that's who this video was for, all right? But don't shoot the messenger, right? Don't shoot the person symbolically Like, just because I reminded you that self-defense is a thing that could be necessary, hey, don't get mad. Take some active steps. Get some training, right? Get some proper training. Maybe just get in better shape, situational awareness, things like that. That's more constructive than, oh, you must be a psycho. You had a knife. Oh, not really. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on people that get triggered and have an irrational fear of inanimate objects. All right, YouTube. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. As I said, for your convenience, all the links, if they are still available, these will be listed down in the text description box. If you like videos like this, if you like discussions like this topic is rarely covered, okay? For every video like this, you're going to see 100 videos featuring a $300 titanium frame lock, super steel folder, and that's cool, you know, but I mean, I do think there should be at least a little corner of the knife world where people can still discuss things that are not bought as some sort of like luxury item, like a Rolex, like the folding knife equivalent of a fancy watch, right? There's a place for that. Hey, I have some expensive stuff, but if you like discussions like this, yeah, go ahead and leave a good comment. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. This has been We All Juggle Knives. I'm out.